is here. You're here.
Gembi.
Gembi.
And where's the ambassador?
Bright Light City. So, me and you against the real world.
Okay, can everyone hear us all right? Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Miret Mabouk. I'm the Deputy Director and Director of Research and Programs for the Rafiq Hariri Center. And we are here today to talk about a particularly challenging and particularly urgent issue, the challenges to the Yemeni peace process. We are very, very lucky to have today's panel. Before we go into that, I've just been told, if you want to follow along on Twitter, please do, all right? Just send your, and if you have questions that you'd like to ask on Twitter, please send them to @ACMidEast. You can do this in English or in Arabic. Questions that you send, we will be able to repeat here. So please go right ahead and do that. And if you'd also like to use the hashtag #ACSaudi. All right. So we are very, very lucky to have today's panel. It represents a good cross-section of the issues involved in today's problem, in the Yemeni issue. It isn't everyone, because we couldn't get everyone here, but it is an important cross-section. To my left, we are very, very lucky to have His Excellency Khalid al-Yemeni, the permanent representative of Yemen to the United Nations. And Mr. al-Yemeni is a career diplomat. He has served in the Foreign Minister's office as director, but he's also, he was the chief negotiator at the permanent mission in New York during Yemen's chairmanship of the group of 77 developing countries in China. Mr. al-Yemeni negotiated the outcome document of the Millennium Development Goals Review Conference back in 2010. He will be mostly discussing the Yemen issue from the UN perspective. All right. To my left, on the side, we are delighted to have Ms. Nadwa Dawsari. Ms. Dawsari is a conflict specialist and civil society leader with over 15 years of experience. She works on civil society development, women, youth empowerment, and elections monitoring. And she's a leading Yemeni specialist on tribal conflict resolution. She's a pioneer in designing and implementing innovative, culture-specific, conflict-sensitive programs. And anyone who knows anything about Yemen knows how particularly relevant this is to the Yemeni issue. To my left, we are lucky to have Dr. Nabil Khouri. Dr. Nabil Khouri is a non-resident senior fellow with us. We're very lucky to have him. But he's also a career diplomat with the US. He has been involved in political science and diplomacy in 25 years, both on the practical side as a career diplomat and from the academic side as a university lecturer. He's lectured at National Defense University, Northwestern University, and the University of Jordan. And he's particularly well qualified to be on today's panel because he was the DCM in Yemen, 2004 to 2007. And finally, last but by no means least, we have our non-resident fellow on Saudi matters, Mr. Mohammed Al-Yahya. Mohammed Al-Yahya is a research fellow also at the Gulf Research Center and at the King Faisal Center for Research in Islamic Studies, and he's been published in the Financial Times, The Guardian, The Monitor, Al Arabiya, The Huffington Post. We are very lucky to have this panel. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to just speak for 5 to 10 minutes to set up the discussion, and then I will ask them a question just to kick off the discussion, and then we'll open the floor. All right. Thank you so much. Your Excellency, perhaps you could start.
Thank you. I know that 7 minutes is quite difficult to time frame to respect. I will try to be disciplined and stick to the timing so that we have enough time for discussion. I'm not going to give you the overview, although I prepared that overview to place you on really the crisis in Yemen and the timing where we are now. But I'm going to talk about 5 topics, touch upon 5 topics, just to give you the Yemeni UN perspective on those 5 issues, especially the new administration and the relations between the old and new administration, the impacting influence of the administration on the peace process. And I will be talking about the Guterres review, the new Secretary General review of Yemen. And I will be talking about UN Resolution 2216, what makes this resolution always valid and vivid as an element to address the crisis. And I will be talking about the Iranian dimension and the Russian position. Always it's very difficult when you talk to experts about 2216. They said, oh, it's very difficult to impose 2216 on the Houthis. How can they digest this difficult resolution? Because the resolution is per se is sort of capitulation, and there is no way for the Houthis to accept. What happened to this resolution, it was going from acceptance to a refusal, then coming back to be revived as the unique, as I mentioned to it, as the most important legal instrument at the disposal of the international community to address to recover the legitimacy in Yemen and recover law and order in the country. And when we started the making of 2216, and we passed that resolution in April 14, 2015, it was really with huge acceptance from the international community that was the best way to address the Yemeni crisis and to regain legitimacy and peace and order in the country. Even Russia at that time decided to support 2216 by not voting against, but not participating in the vote and deciding to be supportive. What happened after that? The resolution started to take place. We started the first contact in Geneva. We started the second contact in BL, and the third contact in Kuwait. And we realized that it was functioning, because really the Houthis were accepting to deal with 2216, although partially, but they accepted to take 2216 as the basis for the settlement. Then came the administration, Obama administration and Kerry initiative to kidnap the entire peace process and to impact negatively on the outcome. Kerry was thinking that he will have a very positive input by bringing his name and his influence in his reputation in the last 2 weeks of the process. But really, if you know the impact, the negative impact of Kerry was really devastating, because we need now to recover the peace process from the point we had established in Kuwait. So as I mentioned to you, the resolution is there. It's still valid. It's the only way for us to address the Yemeni crisis. And today, it's the only realistic approach at the table of negotiation to achieve durable peace in Yemen. In a sense, 2216 is restoring Yemen establishment. So now I will move to talk about the administration. We have a very special relations with the United States, and always in our war against terrorism, we really forged this alliance to fight side by side to defeat international terrorism and its manifestation in the Middle East and Yemen especially. And we really achieved so far a lot of positive understandings with the administration, and we thought that we are allies in the war against terrorism. But if I may characterize our relations with the Obama administration, I would say it might be a deceiving alliance. Why? Because it started somewhere. Even in every moment, if you want more detail, I can go. From the beginning, it was very positive, and then it started to be deteriorating by the time. And in the last moment of that administration, we were just praying that this administration should not take further obstacles toward peace and should go in peace. And we were all looking for the new administration to come with its fresh approach towards international relations. It was so serious that the administration were in one point, and in my judgment, it was something related to the compromises that the Obama administration took in the Iranian deal. It was the result of that Iranian deal that the Obama administration was acting in Yemen and acting somewhere else. I don't want to judge other countries, but if I may, what happened in Syria, after all this, fight and the pushing of the administration to get a balanced solution in Syria, it ended up giving it to Russia. And they were trying to do the same in the Yemeni case. I don't want to go into other cases, just want to enlighten you with one example of what happened. So the administration, this deceiving alliance is something that we can talk about for 2 hours and talk about what happened between our two countries. From my perspective in the UN, it was, something that we always admired the work of Samantha Power and the very strong woman, but we realized that she was receiving a lot of pressure to move somewhere in this alliance between the understandings between the administration and Iran. So the administration, we came to this administration with a very valid record of good relations. And this administration is understanding the impact, the negative impact of the Kerry's promises to the Houthis in their meeting in Muscat. In their meeting in Muscat, Kerry promised the Houthis they will be part of and parcel, and a very dominant part and parcel of the solution. And he gave them a very false image that the United States will help to empower them in that peace process. And it resulted in a very damaging on the peace process. If I move on to the Guterres review, I met the new Secretary General twice. In my first meeting, it was before taking office, and the second meeting after taking office. And Mr. Guterres is really somebody that you admire from the first meeting, because he's an intellectual, and the only difference between Ban Ki-moon and Guterres that you are talking to really a heavy caliber of intellectual. He can address issues, he can talk, he can improvise. He is not depending on secretariat and people sneaking around papers, and he's somebody that you really admire the quality of. So, and when we addressed this issue, he said from the beginning, we recognize that there is really this Iranian dimension, and we need to address this Iranian dimension. I will try to talk to the Iranians. Then he said, maybe a Helsinki forum, sort of Helsinki. You remember the Helsinki Conference for Peace and Security in Europe was established during the Cold War. And he was thinking maybe some format like that can diffuse the tension between the Arabs and the Persians, and try to accommodate our common interest and to live in peace in that place without hegemonic approaches. So how can we address this issue? He is thinking about how serious is the challenge of the Iranian connection. So, but he also recognized the UN limitations. You know that, I mean, somebody will see the building and think that the UN can do anything. Actually, the UN can't do anything, because what the UN is doing is the influence of member states and the P5 especially in the affairs of the world. If what happened in the Yemeni crisis from 2011 was what we call it the G10, or what we rename it after that as the G18, was supportive of the peace process from the beginning. So there was no intervention, no meddling in the work of the special envoy, but supporting the work of the special envoy. That's why it's contributed to a very positive outcome. We reached a lot of progress at the outcome document of the national dialogue when we prepared the draft constitution in Yemen, and we were ready to go into the second phase of the transition before the coup took over in September 21st then in 2014. So the limitation of the UN is a real one, but it requires the will of the international community, especially the will of the P5, to give space to the UN to move. If that is okay, then the Secretary General can do a lot of positive work. If this is not the case, and any one country can impact. I remember a short story when it was from the old time of Khrushchev. I remember that it was the representative of the UN, the Russian and the Americans were in the Security Council, and Khrushchev came with a cigar, and I think the Secretary General the day before he was instructing the UN building that nobody can smoke. So the guy came with the cigar, and he was, Secretary General was talking to him, Mr. Foreign Minister, you know that cigar is prohibited in the. He said, he was, talking in a very aggressive. He gave him an aggressive answer. Do you think that you are the owner of this building? It's ours. This building is ours. So you do what we ask you to do. So this is, summarizing what is really the case of dealing with the UN. And if I may also, I will go about if we evaluate the work of Ismail with Sheikh Ahmed, it's the same. It's the space that we give him to do his job. In September 23rd, in a meeting of the Quad, we call it the Quartet, you call it the Quad. And in that meeting, Ismail was really alarming the meeting about the too much pressure that they put on Hadi, the too much pressure they put on the legitimate government in return of nothing. in return of promises that the Houthis will withdraw, will disarm, will accept the UN deal. But the real thing that you will give them, that you will remove the last, I call it the last defense of the republic, which is the legitimacy, the president. And that's why when we were discussing, I was explaining to them, this is exactly what happened in Somalia. In Somalia in '92, when the state collapsed, because there were no president at all, and all the ministers of the government tend to be warlords. So they took arms, and everybody was defending his own agenda. And this is what really Kerry was planning to do. Was just, you ignore Hadi, we will accommodate after that. If the last president, the last wall of the republic just been knocked down, that there will be no republic at all. And it will be worse than Somalia. And this is what I kept explaining to people. So I think Ismail is also working on the space that we give him. The member states, the P5, and the people involved on the ground. And so far, he's not doing that bad, but he is really a facilitator in the peace process. And if we understand what's the meaning of facilitator, this is what he's doing. So the Iranian involvement, if I move to this fourth topic, the Iranian involvement is a serious issue. People will say, we don't see the Iranians. We don't see them, we don't see. I would say always that Iran is really, I mean, with huge experience in cleaning all their dirty steps everywhere. They are, you know that Iran is in Yemen, and we know them through the arms and ammunition, through the training, through the interoperability. Even the operations that the Houthis are taking, the old attempts against international navigation in the southern part of the Red Sea is the same that they used against the Americans in the Hormuz Strait in the Gulf. Is the same, 100%. Is copy-paste. They do the same. And they do the same when they try to attack the borders of the Saudis. They're thinking that through this terror, they can create a balance of terror. And the balance of terror will lead into recognizing them as de facto power in Yemen. But really, now after the effect of the border diminished, they moved into the Red Sea. And we, after liberated the southern part of the Red Sea, now they have less chances to attack international navigation line. We still think that Hodeidah will be another also spot of their terrorist activities against international navigational lines. And but I think in Yemen, with this war of regaining sovereignty and regaining legitimacy, we defeated the Ayatollah dream. And this is one fact. I mean, guys, I'm not joking. They were very happy in announcing that this is the fourth capital and it's under their hand, and they keep saying that everywhere. But in fact, that Ayatollah's dream of having the fourth capital vanished. And they are now just trying to get any profit out of this situation. The Iranians understand that in Yemen they cannot have any success. Maybe they will have it somewhere else, but in Yemen they are defeated, and they know that. If I may move quickly to the idea of state-sponsored terrorism, Iran is state-sponsored terrorism, and we think that if their proxies are being named terrorist group, this will be something that will change the dynamics of the peace process in Yemen. We will be dealing with Ansar Allah, or we're dealing with the Houthis as a terrorist group. That's why we say that the window of opportunities is still open, and we think that we need them to be part of the political settlement in Yemen. But if they insist in destroying Yemen and insist in using terrorist methods, we will look into other options. And on the Russian, I give you a very positive note in the beginning about the participation of Russia with the issuance of 2216. And this is always our appreciation of the Russians. The official Russia is very positive. The official Russia always will tell you that we support the legitimate government and we are supportive of keeping the establishment in Yemen, and we are against the anarchy that might come with all these militias and the Houthis and all these attempts against the central government. But we have a problem in the UN, because the UN, the Russians, they use the trade-off with Syria. So Yemen is linked to Syria and linked to other issues. That's why we will have, always when I discuss this issue with Vitaly Churkin, I realize that he's not against the legitimacy in Yemen. He's not against the establishment in Yemen, but he has a business to do trading off the issue of Yemen with Syria. I don't want to go further into details, although I have prepared also a few notes on the way forward, but I will keep it open for the discussion to talk about the way forward.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency.
MashaAllah alayk.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. If we can move now to a sort of more detailed, more micro level, and take a look what's happening in Yemen. Dosari, perhaps you could lead us through what's happening on the peace process.
Okay. So I'll be talking about the civilians' perspective on the peace talks in Yemen. And this is based on interviews with over 160 civilians who were and are directly affected by the conflict in 5 governorates, including the capital city of Sana'a, as part of research I have done for the Center for Civilians in Conflict late last year. The interviews showed a deep resentment towards the negotiations, towards the peace talks by the civilians. They said that for these reasons, civilians said that they extremely distrust actors who are currently involved in the talks, all actors. They feel that these actors are only interested in negotiating power at the expense of Yemenis. Some of the civilians even thought that these actors are interested more in sustaining the conflict because they benefit more from the status quo and the continuation of the war. But more importantly, civilians felt that these actors don't represent them. In other words, they felt that they're not represented in the peace negotiations, which brings me to my argument about these peace talks. I think, in my opinion, the UN-led peace talks are deeply flawed. They're elite-centric, they're not inclusive, and they are not built on solid understanding of Yemen's conflict or interpretation of Yemen's conflict. So when it comes to Yemen's conflict, there are 2 main aspects. The first aspect of the conflict is the power struggle among the traditional northern elite and their patronage network. This struggle started in the early 2000s when Saleh started taking steps to solidify power into the hands of his immediate family and prepare his son to become the successor, which angered his allies who thought it was an attempt by Saleh to marginalize them. So this power struggle escalated in 2011 when Saleh's allies, who, by the way, most of them now are on the Hadi camp, it escalated in 2011 when they backed the youth uprising that eventually pushed Saleh out of power. The second and more important aspect and ignored aspect of the Yemen conflict is the local grievances and the deep resentment towards these elite from the majority of Yemenis, because these elite have, over decades, they have hijacked state institutions. They've controlled power and resources and used that to oppress and marginalize the rest of the country. These grievances manifested themselves in the 2011 youth uprising and they turned into violent or armed resistance in 2014 and 2015. So my analysis is that since 2011, the UN and the international community have been trying to address only the power struggle aspect of the Yemen conflict and widely ignored the underlying grievances. And that's why the transition process and the peace talks failed. Basically, since 2011, the UN peace talks have mainly focused on the elite, the national elite, who are corrupt, who lack legitimacy and influence, who are disconnected from and widely rejected by the Yemeni people, and who are a huge part of the problem. And the talks widely ignored the internal dynamics of the conflict and failed to engage local actors who have influence, who have legitimacy, and who could potentially be part of an important part of the solution. So in my opinion, as long as these national actors have monopoly over the peace process, over the peace talks, Yemen will see no peace. No elite compromise will resolve Yemen conflict. And until we recognize that and act on it, the war will not stop. Thanks.
Thank you so much. All right. Mohammed, if we move over to you, we bring up an important section of this discussion. Saudi Arabia and Saudi Arabia's role in any outcome for this challenge. Could you? Please?
Sure. I actually wanted to talk about 4 things. So a quick update on what I understand the coalition has achieved in the past few months tactically on the ground. That will be very quick. And then what I understand Saudi Arabia's objectives are in Yemen and how they play into a possible peace scenario. A little bit about the Iranian role as I see it in Yemen. And then what the kingdom expects from the Trump administration in comparison to what is expected from the Obama administration. So recently, as we stand right now, 82% of Yemen is controlled by coalition forces. Now there's a lot of land that's uninhabited that pushes that percentage up, and a lot of areas that have very high population density that are not under the control of the coalition, but that's a percentage when we speak about land mass as it stands right now. Recently, the coalition has secured Al-Makha port, and Al-Makha is very strategic in that it's very important for international interests in the Gulf of Aden and U.S. maritime security interests. And they're moving to Hodeidah next, from what I understand from coalition sources. Recently, special forces from the UAE and Saudi Arabia eliminated 500 Al-Qaeda operatives in Mukalla. There's been talk of some resurgence after that. It hasn't been very clear to me exactly where that is, but that was a very big advancement for the coalition. Now moving to the Saudi objectives in Yemen, and that's something that has been really confused in Western policy circles to a great extent. You hear a lot about Saudi Arabia wanting Yemen to become a subordinate state or wanting to exert its hegemonic interests on Yemen, and I think that's not the case whatsoever. If that were the case, they wouldn't have brokered the peace deal by which Ali Abdullah Saleh left power and Abd Rabbu Mansour Hadi entered power in 2011. That was a testament to the fact that Saudi Arabia is interested in having a stable and prosperous Yemen to the south of its border. You can argue that its relationship with Ali Abdullah Saleh in the past and the way it's dispensed aid to Yemen has been very inefficient, and this aid has been misallocated. But at the end of the day, this aid was integral to keeping Yemen afloat. And without this aid, complete disintegration of the Yemeni state was definitely a possibility. Yemen has the second highest number of small arms per capita in the world. And if you'll guess which country has is in the #1 spot, it's this one. But you see, there's a high propensity for Yemen to become a state even in worse shape than Somalia. Once the Houthis took over Sana'a in September, and I'll speak a little bit more about this when I talk about the Iranian role, I argue that that's the time that the Saudis should have intervened in Yemen. You see, people don't ask themselves what would happen to Yemen if Saudi were to stop this operation right now, or what would have happened to Yemen if Saudi didn't engage in this operation to begin with. It wouldn't have been giving in this integral aid that I spoke about under the Saleh years to the Houthi government. Iran wouldn't have stepped in and funded things like social services, infrastructure, hospitals, schools, all of these things, all of these aspects of Yemen received extensive Saudi funding. Sure, a lot of it's been misallocated, but a lot of it has been integral to Yemen. So if we come to the Iranian role in Yemen, you know, Iran has a very wide network of militias all over the Arab world. I mean, there's 47 militias in Iraq that it controls. Some of those militias it controls almost fully. Others it controls less. Hezbollah it exerts a lot of control over. Sure, its control over the Houthis is not as high as its control is over other militias, but there is control nonetheless. I mean, a good example of that is I hear from very credible sources in the region and from within Iran that the Iranians didn't want the Houthis to march on Sana'a, let alone march on Aden. What they wanted to create is a paramilitary force that was parallel to the state structure in Yemen that they can use to prod the kingdom or the kingdom's allies and have a weak central government led by Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi or whoever else, and then a very powerful paramilitary force that's allied with the Saleh government. This didn't manifest and it didn't work. The Houthis didn't listen. And my reading of the situation is because there are divergent interests between what the Houthis want and Ali Abdullah Saleh wants. Ali Abdullah Saleh wants Yemen back under his control, under his full control. He backtracked from what he told the Gulf Cooperation Council in 2011. And this divergence of interests is why he pushed them to march on Sana'a and then pushed them to march on Aden. I mean, the entire idea of Houthis controlling Aden, where you have southern separatists, a very different tribal structure, is a little bit nuts. I mean, of course they wouldn't accept rule by a tribe or a group from the northernmost part of Yemen. And that's why this control of Aden was very short-lived, and the coalition made a very quick advancement there. Now, the type of material support that the Iranians give the Houthis is very specific. I mean, you have Zilzal 3 and Zilzal 4 rockets. These are rockets that are made in Iran and are brought into Yemen. For example, the rocket that was lobbed at Mecca recently, that was a repurposed Russian ground-to-air missile that was made ground-to-ground in Tehran. Or in Iran, not in Tehran, and brought into Yemen. A lot of these weapons come in through Somalia, come in through the Gulf of Aden. But what's interesting is that there are some rockets that North Korea supplied only to Syria. These are Russian rockets, and they've made their way into Yemen. It's still a mystery how these rockets made it from Syria into Yemen, and you know, one can look at it as Iran having franchises all over the Middle East and just reallocating resources. But that's on the weapons level. In terms of media, most of the media for the Houthis is run from Beirut. It's run from Dahia with Hezbollah and Iran oversight. The last point is training. Training is very important. I mean, the Houthis have acquired so much expertise in a very short period of time, and there's a very complex and robust training mechanism by which Houthi fighters go to Lebanon in order to be trained. Iranian commanders come into Yemen for extensive training programs. So it's a multifaceted approach to you know, prop up the Houthis. But this doesn't necessarily translate into the Houthis doing exactly what Iran wants whenever they want it. So there isn't full control over Houthi policy or the policy of the alliance between Abdullah Saleh and the Houthis, but the support is integral to the success of the Houthis specifically, and not the Republican guards on the ground. And what Saudi Arabia wants from the Trump administration, I mean, from what I understand, there was a little bit of frustration with the rolling back of U.S. support for the operation, and this is intelligence sharing. This is more issues that are of a more logistical nature, like aerial refueling and border support. What the Saudi Arabia expects from the Trump administration is just a step up of all of these things. You know, more intelligence cooperation, more political support, more logistical support at the borders and during operations. I mean, what was very well received in Saudi Arabia is a statement by Flynn recently that you know, held Iran accountable for what the Houthis did in Yemen by lobbying, with the ship that attacked the Saudi frigate. I said in an event in the past that I expect the Iranians in the first 6 months to test the U.S. administration and to see how Trump would respond. And this would be something like, arresting U.S. Marines or harassing U.S. ships in the Gulf or kidnapping Americans, just to see what the Trump administration would do in comparison to an Obama administration that was very lax on these things. But it seems the NSC didn't even wait for them to do that. They jumped on the opportunity when the Houthis attacked the Saudi frigate and drew the line there and put them on notice. I still don't know what putting someone on notice means, but it sounds very scary. And I think I'll stop there.
Your questions, I think.
Sure.
With that. Thank you. If we can step outside a little bit, and I'll ask Nabil to weigh in with the...
Outside.
I'll ask Nabil to weigh in with the bigger international picture, if possible. And I think because we are running over, so I think at the end I'll just take one question for 2 or 3 of you, and then we'll open it up to the audience so everyone gets a chance to... Please.
All right, so I think 5 of my 7 minutes were already donated to the ambassador here.
You promised that for coming to the room.
So in
He
2
gave me 2
minutes,
minutes.
let me just give you a very big picture, what I think are the obstacles to peace, leaving the details to the question and answer. Yemen, like other countries in the region, should be looked at nationally, regionally, and internationally. Nationally, and that's was the critical level and still is the critical level. The obstacle being that essentially after 2011, we may put it nicely in diplomatic language, but in essence, the state failed. The departure of President Saleh, whether you like him or don't like him, is besides the point, created a void. And there was a struggle to fill that void. Essentially, the Yemen conflict is a struggle for power. Now, as such, if the Yemenis had gotten together and really and truly agreed on a new formula by which to share power in Yemen and by which the country should be ruled, we wouldn't be in the mess that we are in today. This was the issue in 2011 and 2012. And it's still the issue today, although today it's much more complex because of regional and international dimensions of the conflict. Regionally, Saudi Arabia, rightly, has always considered Yemen to be its backyard. Very long borders, Yemen's strategic location at the entrance of the Red Sea. So it's always been very important for Saudi Arabia to control or to be comfortable with whoever is in charge in Yemen. In order to do that, it was largely uncontested, and it played off different tribes and tried to organize tribal power in Yemen in such a way that it could be comfortable. Occasionally, historically, it was challenged by outside forces, but generally, it had the situation under control, more or less. Now, with 2009, 2010, the first Saudi intervention in Yemen on behalf of Saleh at the time, and then the 2015 intervention in full force, that complicates the picture because that immediately puts Yemen in the regional struggle for power between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And we'll get to the Iran issue because I disagree a bit with the assessment already presented on the role of Iran. But nevertheless, essentially you have Saudi Arabia acting in a way to try in how it perceives regional power to block Iran from having an impact inside Yemen. Particularly, I would say, and this is very much the Houthis' fault, is occupying Sana'a and then moving south, which means that if Iran supports the Houthis fully, then Iran's guns would be at Bab al-Mandeb, and that's something that Saudi Arabia, nor the US for that matter, could put up with. But so from Saudi point of view, what they have been doing since 2010, I would argue, is essentially oppose Iran, not so much doing what Yemen needs to have done. If you move to the international level, essentially the US had more or less the upper hand in Yemen. Again, historically interrupted here and there, the Gulf War, the 2003 war, etc. But the US goals in Yemen have always been, although they've shifted somewhat right now in terms of priority, essentially counterterrorism in Yemen, which has nothing to do with Yemen. The focus here is AQAP, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Secondly, it's supporting an ally, namely Saudi Arabia. Again, that is not Yemen-centric. That means whatever the predilections of the Saudis are, this is something that the US would have to accommodate. And that was very much the case when President Obama decided to support the Saudi war in Yemen as a compensation mainly for having angered them with the Iran nuclear deal. He really probably didn't deep down support that war, but he felt, I really have to give the Saudis that one. And maybe by helping them, I would have some control. It didn't work out that way. The third goal is countering Iran's influence. And again, countering Iran's influence depends on your perception of Iran's role, where they are intervening, where you can block them. So all three goals have nothing to do with stability and prosperity of Yemen. The focus has always been, where's Al-Qaeda? What does Saudi Arabia want? Where is Iran? So instead of focusing on stability inside Yemen, and I can tell you stories because I was involved, where you would talk to people in our administration and say what we need to do is diplomatically try to patch things together and keep Yemen together, because if Yemen falls apart, it'll be worse than Afghanistan. I've used those very words, only to be told, oh, Nabil, nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to jump into tribal politics and try to mediate and help keep the country together. Therefore, I will just wrap this up by saying at all three levels, there could have been a different approach. And at all three levels, a Yemen first, if we can borrow that expression, was not implemented, was not the case, including by the Yemenis themselves. And by the way, the latest this morning is that we talk about the Hadi side, whatever that means. The Hadi side is involved in internecine conflict right now in South Yemen. The fighting going on in South Yemen now is not with the Houthis. It's between factions supported by Saudi Arabia, factions supported by the UAE, and Hadi is hiding somewhere in Aden. Maybe the USS Cole was sent specifically so that it could evacuate him. But he's nowhere to be seen right now. Maybe our ambassador here knows. And that's it. I'll leave the details to the question and answer.
Thank you so much. So I'm very conscious that there are probably going to be a lot of questions, but I'll just ask two very quick questions, perhaps, based on what everyone has said, to His Excellency and to Mohammed. Mohammed may be the shorter, easier one, in that people have been saying on the panel, well, Yemen could have been like Somalia. Yemen could have been like Somalia. I think there are many Yemenis that would argue that the situation is really not much better than Somalia. So at which point is perhaps the Saudi government going to step back and say, it may be that the cost is greater than we had thought? One. And the other question is to His Excellency. As Nadwa noted, one of the flaws, one of what Chief perceives as a flaw in the negotiations has been that it has not been at a sufficiently domestic level. And you had said that that the Yemeni government would be delighted to talk to the Houthis or to talk to anyone else as long as they were part of the solution. what do you think what would you see as, what compromises do you think could be made to bring them in, and how do you think you're going to be able to bring this in at a sufficiently domestic level? Just for those two, and then we'll open it up.
If I may. It's always the question between intellectuals and politicians. Intellectuals will say all the time it's not enough. But to regain the establishment, it's our obligation, all the people of Yemen. I'm talking to the silent majority, if there is such silent majority in Yemen. So I don't want intellectuals to hide behind this silent majority, say, no, this process in Kuwait, this process in BL is not representing us. It's not representing us, so that we need to be involved in this process. We are all involved because it's recovering Yemen that is at stake. At stake here is a nation that been kidnapped on the 21st of September 2014 by a pro-Iranian militia. You might accept that, you might not accept that, you might question this question, but the establishment in Yemen has been kidnapped by a pro-Iranian militia. I need to talk, if that's why I think, squeezed to that timing. I try to be squeezed, but I have to talk to you about the sanction regime and the influence of Iran. I want to talk to you about, but I want just to end up with one line. And I mentioned that to Nabil in our private talks before coming to this meeting. Have you seen Yemeni sending any armed shipment to Iran? Any recorded history of Yemeni sending armed shipments or militias to attack Iran? Never. But in the UN, we have registered 10 cases, legally registered, of Iranian shipments of arms and ammunition sent to the Houthis in Yemen to destroy Yemen, to take Yemen by force, and to kidnap the sovereignty of that country.
Yeah, the humanitarian crisis has reached very alarming levels in Yemen, and I take that point that you're making, but I mean, it's incomparable to a situation like Somalia's. I mean, the central bank has been brought to Aden. Even civil servants that are in Sana'a right now are getting paid through private finance companies. Over the past month, this is what's been rolling out. I mean, if you follow. Yeah. This is a country at war, but still far from a place as chaotic as Somalia. And to answer the question more specifically, Aden is under control. 82% of the country, despite the caveats that I mentioned earlier, are controlled by the legitimate government. But another important factor to consider is that even under Ali Abdullah Saleh's years, it was Saudi aid that covered a wide variety of government services that kept Yemen afloat. It might have been misallocated to a great level. Maybe the majority of this aid was misallocated and squandered due to corruption. But were it not for this aid, then we would see a Yemen that's headed towards a situation like Somalia. So this aid would have never come to a Houthi allied coup government that was in charge in Sana'a. The only way to go forward, and there can be no prosperous Yemen without good relations with its northernmost neighbor, and there can be no stable Saudi Arabia without good relations with the Yemeni neighbor. So, Iran doesn't have much skin in the game, and it doesn't have much to lose, whereas Saudi Arabia does.
Okay, thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, if we could take questions. All right, just please let us know. The mics will be over to you. Please just let us know who you are and who the question is going to be. Your Excellency.
Yes, I'm Mubarak, the ambassador of Yemen. Just I want to assure my colleague Nabil that just President Hadi is right now is chairing a meeting in Aden and Al-Ma'ashiq. So just and yesterday the same. And what happened in Aden airport is just some clashes. It's not fighting as you just described it. Secondly, but just as you know that I was the Secretary General of the National Dialogue. And Houthis and Saleh, since we started the political transition process, they were well represented. Houthis in the national conference, they were overrepresented in the national dialogue. Saleh has 50% at that national dialogue and also at the, unity government. So since we started, the formula that we talked about, they were well represented, but I think they believe that they can get by force the whole pie. Why they have to accept just one slice? So this is the beginning of the problem. It's not about the other Yemenis accepting to include everyone and having inclusive process, because since this process, design, it was inclusive. But inclusive, again, when it started, 50% from the south, 30% women, 20% youth, all the walks of life, they were represented in that conference. And even if anyone has any comments, concern, peacefully we can fix. We can adopt these comments. We can fix it. But I think the main problem that Saleh and Houthis, and they are representing the interest of the power who ruled the country for hundreds of years. They felt that if they let it go, they will not get it anymore. And by the force that they have, they can get the whole buy. So I think this is the problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Sir? I think that was a comment, not but I mean, if you do have a response.
Yeah. Just only to say that definitely at the start of the conflict, the Houthis were overambitious. And definitely after taking Sana'a, partly because there was almost no reaction when they took Sana'a. They felt they could go all the way and take the whole pie, as you were saying. But I think now, after 2 years of war, they've certainly been bloodied enough, and their areas have been destroyed enough that they no longer have the same kind of ambition. So they had it at first. Now I think they would definitely accept some kind of a power arrangement. And 2216 is a fine arrangement, and I think at heart everybody accepts it. But it's a question of timing, sequencing, and getting everybody to say, do you step first back, or do they step back first, etc. And that can be arranged, I think. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Sir, please.
Okay, my name is Kais. I'm an independent researcher, and I have just an observation. There are actually two peace processes. The first one has just ended in 2014, and the next one started in 2015. That's obviously not being mentioned here. I think the first peace process was the international community was behind it, obviously, but there was a lot of discrepancies when we are talking about how they supported the peace process. We'll see that, for example, the IMF imposed, the lifting of subsidies, which actually undermined the peace process and undermined the coalition government. Also, Saudi Arabia, at that point of time, kicked about 800,000 laborers from Saudi Arabia. Now, in this current peace process, what do we expect? This is the question put to you. If the UN cannot go behind the peace process, we know it's a regional war, it's an international war. And this happened actually in the 1960s. Saudi Arabia and Britain was at war with Egypt in Yemen. Now we see Saudi Arabia and other countries are at war with Iran in Yemen. What could be done to get out of this situation? Thank you.
The question is addressed to whom?
To the panel, I mean.
All right, thank you. Who would like to tackle that? Perhaps we could ask.
I'm happy
Please.
to take it if I'm.
Please.
Go ahead.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I have the mic. So my analysis, I think that the conflict will continue. I don't think that this peace process, the way it is now, will end Yemen conflict. I don't see the conflict. I mean, I see the regional and international dimension of the conflict, but the Yemeni conflict is Yemeni, is local. And this peace process does not address any of the local issues. So the conflict is likely to proceed, to continue, until I don't know when. It's hard to predict at this point.
I agree. I mean, I think the crux of it is at the local level. If the Yemenis agreed with one another, nobody else would be able to interfere and impose their will. I have to say, though, in terms of the U.S., the changeover, we have a new administration, as you may have heard, and you may also have heard that it's a bit difficult to predict what this new administration thinks or will do, possibly, or will say, certainly. But I think the priorities that I mentioned earlier are still the same. Counter-terror, as far as Yemen is concerned. Counter-terrorism, supporting an ally, fending off Iran, except the nuances are different. Fending off Iran has taken on more muscle, and probably there will be more aggressive action towards Iran somehow. And supporting Saudi Arabia will also likely be more aggressive, if the word is correct. There seems to be developing some kind of an understanding between the two. I would caution, however, the Yemenis not to be too happy with that. Particularly, we were talking earlier about considering the Houthis terrorists. There are voices within this administration here that wants to do that. And there are voices in Yemen and in Saudi Arabia who would be happy to hear something like that. That would not be a good development, because that means perpetuating the problem. The Americans are not going to put soldiers on the ground to defeat the Houthis for you. And Saudi Arabia and the GCC countries together are probably the richest entity in the world. And after 2 years of using everything they have not yet subdued the Houthis. They've practically leveled Yemen, but they have not subdued the Houthis. So considering them as terrorists and means going all out militarily and forgetting diplomacy. I would strongly urge you not to do that. Even if Trump tells you to do it, don't do it.
Right. Thank you. Let me just, if I can just ask Nadwa, because it's really too important to drop. What is it going to take for the Yemenis to solve their problems internally?
I honestly, my theory, I think internal diplomacy can do much better work than international diplomacy in Yemen. I think if the Saudis kind of backed off, sorry, and I honestly think that tribal leaders can do a much better work in terms of resolving internal conflicts. And this is, I'm not saying this theoretical. I mean, there is evidence. Tribal mediation efforts have helped push Al-Qaeda elements from the south. Across the south, it was not the military offensive that removed Al-Qaeda elements. It was tribal mediation. Exactly. You hear about prisoner swaps across Yemen between Houthis and local forces opposed to them, and they all happen as a result of tribal mediations. I'll give you one example. Last year, 3 months of failed peace talks in Kuwait, failed peace talks. Only during that period, there were 700 prisoners swapped between the Houthis and other forces. So there is a lot of opportunity, in my opinion, and capacity within Yemen to resolve these local conflicts. I think the international intervention, whether it's from Saudis, whether it's from Iran, and the monopoly of the national actors over the peace process, which is, by the way, it's my opinion, but it's based on civilians' perspectives. I think these do not allow for these local capacities to function and to.
So who's preventing local tribal conflict resolution away? What will it take to get them to the table?
I'll tell you one example. So the tribes have in the past limited Al-Qaeda's presence, including in Al-Bayda, where there are areas that are stronghold for Al-Qaeda. But guess what the tribes have been doing in Al-Bayda in 2014? Fighting the Houthis. The last raid, U.S. raid on Al-Bayda, it reinforced a narrative already existing in Al-Bayda among local tribes opposed to the Houthis, that the U.S. is supporting the Houthis, that this is an American intervention as part of a wider American policy in the region that's pro-Iran and anti-Sunnis. So all these outside interventions, the UN peace talks, a lot of Yemenis outside Houthi control thinks it's benefiting the Houthis. in areas where Houthis are in control, they say these peace talks are, benefiting the Saudis. So it's became about regional actors, international actors. When all these tribes are fighting the Houthis in Marib, they're fighting the Houthis in Bayda, they're fighting the Houthis in Shabwa, they're fighting the Houthis in Abiyan, in almost every tribal area. So if they're busy fighting, they don't have enough time to try to create long-term peace. They do interventions here and there, but they're not long-term.
Certainly. Can I just give everyone just 1 minute to respond to that so that we can take questions? So
Yeah.
one minute each.
I think there's an overestimation of Saudi Arabia's capacity to change political dynamics on the ground in Yemen. It came at the request of the legitimate government in Yemen, and the legitimate government has exercised a large degree of independence throughout the conflict. I mean, I can't speak to specific examples in this forum, but there have been disagreements in tactics with the legitimate government. But at the end of the day, the people that can make the decision politically are Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi's government, even if Saudi Arabia is not on board with that decision. Saudi Arabia was asked to intervene in Yemen at the request of Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi and his government. And this idea that Iran and Saudi Arabia have to sit on some table somewhere in a basement in Bonn or something and decide to end the conflict in Yemen removes the agency of the legitimate government in Yemen, as if they're some non-factor in the entire discussion. So, there are limitations to what the coalition can do on the ground in Yemen and with actors in Yemen. And there is no hiding the fact that the coalition stands 100% behind the legitimate government in Yemen. And for it to act as a broker, isn't necessarily its role in this conflict. You can argue that it should be, but...
Thank you so much, Your Excellency.
Yes.
Can we do it in 1 minute?
I will try. Please, I want just to differentiate between two concepts. I mean, the new administration, domestic policy, we are not entitled to judge that. But the international policy of this administration, we receive positive signals, and we think that this administration is reviving the strength, the image of the United States that have been, destroyed during the last year of Obama administration. This is my own judgment, and I will keep defending that. The signals we receive from the administration is of a nation that wants to take the lead. We will never invite American soldiers on the ground, and you know that Yemenis are enough to fight, not only to wage the war in Yemen, they can wage wars anywhere you want, but we have enough of expertise in that warring stuff. That's why we will never invite Americans, and Americans, they understand that. The issue of exclusiveness, this process is exclusive. I mean, Nadwa, you are talking about that. I mean, do you know who started the war against the Houthis? As you mentioned, not Hadi. The war in Yemen started against the Houthis to push back everywhere in Marib, in Taiz, in Aden, by the people, by the resistance. Then the organization, the establishment started to gain control when the people decided to support the government of Hadi. When the people decided to go to fight for Hadi and for the legitimacy of Yemen. Not the way back. I mean, not because Hadi was there and giving instructions. The people decided to support the legitimate government. Why we see it now the way out? Why we see that there is no national consensus? There is a national consensus. Who is fighting in Al Jof? Is that the Saudis? Who's fighting in Marib? Is that because the Saudis are there supporting us? The Saudis came to Yemen upon request from the legitimate government. But the Saudis and Emiratis, they are not making the war in Yemen. We are recovering our country. This is our nation, and we will fight day by day. If Hadi said something very important to the Secretary General when he met him the first time 2 years ago. He said, look, even without any support from anywhere, we will keep fighting. Even if we have stones to throw them, we will do that, but we will not give up. This is the bottom line of the issue. It's the country that's been kidnapped by force. And we cannot accept the people of Yemen. I'm not part of this political. I'm somebody who served in the foreign service, and I really believe in this cause. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Look, very quickly, the situation, I mean, Yemen has one of the oldest tribal mediation traditions in the world, and one which still functions, by the way. Tribal society is very much intact in Yemen. The thing is that the peace processes have not employed, have not empowered this tribal mediation skill and tradition in Yemen. The country is fragmented now. I mean, your question as to who's preventing them, to some extent, war is preventing them, and the fact that the country has fragmented, the state has failed. So whoever is doing, Jamal bin Omar did not employ this properly. And now, well, Ismail is not doing it either. Whoever is trying to bring peace must bring the main powers together and employ tribal mediation. I think it would work.
Thank you so much. Okay. Gentleman there. Actually, just to move things along, if you could take 2 questions at a time, so it would be this gentleman and then the lady over there on the left.
All right. Mohammed Al-Shwaitar, I'm a research associate with Public International Law and Policy. I have a question. I raised it not longer time ago, event about Saudi Arabia new policy in the region. Muhammad Ali Yahya was there. My question was at that time, how's the conflict of interest between Saudi Arabia and UAE can undermine the peace in Yemen? I'm raising the question today again because of what's happening lately around the airport in Aden.
Thank you very much. The lady on the side.
My name is Amy Davis. I'm a student at Georgetown University. My question is addressed to the whole panel. To what extent do you see Yemen's water security or water insecurity as a driver of the conflict, or alternatively, do you see water management as a useful platform for peace building in the future? Thank you.
Thank you. So if we say the first question to Mohammed, who'd like to take the second question? Your Excellency, would you like to take water security? Thank you. All right.
Yeah. So, I mean, there have been tactical disagreements between the Emiratis and the Saudis in Yemen, but they've been extremely overblown by, in many cases, disinformation campaigns, you know. And in some cases, you would hear stories of almost all-out clashes between Emirati and Saudi soldiers. This is absurd. It's ridiculous. I mean, they both answer to the same coalition headquarters in Riyadh and follow the same procedures on a day-to-day basis. So while there might be tactical disagreements on a planning level, especially in who to support and not support on the ground in Yemen, and you know the political sensibilities of both countries, this really hasn't manifested into anything serious.
And about the water insecurity, it's really, I mean, I keep saying that during my diplomatic career. Now I have this theory of the ant theory, you know. We humans concentrate around the water reservoirs all over the world. So whenever one dries out, people try to move. This is logic. I mean, you know the Exodus in the Old Testament? We are repeating the the Exodus. We will see huge movement of refugees knocking the doors of Europeans. Are they going to bombard them? They need to accommodate. They need to open doors, accommodate. This is human solidarity. And we will keep. Yemen is one of these parts of the world that we are, I mean, running out of water, and we will face difficulties. People with some resources, they can have the desalination, but the end of this will be that we need to accommodate ourselves somewhere where we have water enough for people till we invent something else. But this is logic. I mean, I support this idea. And I think that it drives all sorts of conflict. And it's provoke all sorts of things. And the political crisis is not alienated from that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, thank you. This gentleman over here and then the gentleman at the end. So, thank you.
Good morning. I'm Majid Fani, and I'm originally from Iran. I'm American. I was in my car passing by, I heard this program from C-SPAN, so I appreciate C-SPAN. That pushed me to come over here. And I listened to Mr. Ambassador talking against Iran. I'm independent. I'm not a part of Iranian government. I remember this statement from a friend of mine who narrated this from an Indian ambassador. And that narration, with all due respect to the ambassador, was this: ambassadors are paid to lie about their own countries. And this is very sad. And let me tell you a story from Iranian culture. You know, there is a character in Iranian culture called Mullah Nasruddin. It is kind of satiric. He, in the middle of night, asked his wife to wake up, thieves are coming. And the wife said, well, this is the night, what are the thieves? He said, do you hear anything? She said, no. And then he said, do you see everywhere is dark? She said, yes. Then he said, that's it? Because the thieves come, when they come, they don't make any noise, and everywhere is dark. So the thieves is here. And my point is, no one talked about here what the Saudis are doing, except Dr. Nabil Khouri, who said the Saudis leveled Yemen, unfortunately. And all of the blame is coming to Iranians. There are no news, objective news, about involvements of Iranians as far as I have been following the news, except the accusations. But the Saudis consider, as he said, Yemen as of their own backyard. Lebanon is their own backyard. Syria is their own backyard. Turkey is their own backyard. Afghanistan is their own backyard. How many countries is their own backyard? And nobody asks, are they a representative government? They are representing who? Is there any single election, any ballot box in Saudi Arabia?
Is there a question?
And they started by a government of Yemenis who is partly in power in Yemen, and then the Saudis took the chance, invaded the whole Yemen. And unfortunately, the ambassador, as should be the representative of Yemenis, is representative of Saudi Arabia. Sorry.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations on finding parking so quickly, by the way.
Yeah, it's by accident, you came here without invitation. You discover your way, no? You came here by accident, so you weren't driving. Yeah, mashallah.
Thank you for coming.
Mashallah, mashallah.
I came over here, I was listening to the radio, I thought it is not the truth to talk about involvement of Iranians in the Yemen, because I'm originally from Iran.
Thank you very much for your great point. Thank you very much for your comment.
Nah, if I may, this is the first one. You will take two.
We'll take two questions.
My name is Carlos Rodriguez from the United Nations Information Center. What can the Secretary General do to empower tribal leaders to mediate and resolve the conflict at a local level? How can he facilitate those discussions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you like to take that one first?
Yeah. Do you know, brother? Thank you for coming by chance. Thank you you saw as you mentioned C-SPAN. And again, I think maybe you came late when I mentioned that we have recorded. Yes, brother.
I heard everything you said while I was coming.
Yes, yes. We have recorded. Facts about the mullahs' intervention in Yemeni's affairs. I'm not talking about you. The mullahs is a regime in Iran. We are brothers with the Iranian people. I give you all the time to do whatever you just express yourself. We have, legal foundation for our condemning Iran's intervention and meddling in Yemeni affairs. We have recorded facts. We are not blaming Iran for our grievances. We said that Iran sent 3 shipments. This is only the tip of the iceberg that the UN system managed to catch. All the Iranians, as my brother mentioned, all Al-Qahir Zilzal. Why you bring your Al-Qahir Zilzal to Yemen? Why we need that?
So perhaps if you
This
have
is
another
not your
question,
issue.
perhaps you could ask later. Just so we can take all the questions.
This is your issue. It is your country.
It's my country. I know how to defend my country. And I have all the legitimacy to say that the mullahs of Iran and ayatollahs, criminals, should stop doing what they are doing in our region.
I am against them.
Let's keep it to Q&A, I think, Meret.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Let's
Thank
keep
you.
it to
if you have-
Q&A.
Yes, perhaps if you have another question, we could ask after, just so that we can move things along. Thank you
Yes,
so
he
much.
is done.
So, and, all right, and
I
so
can
did you have a question on
Yeah,
the UN?
but there is another question
About the
about,
tribe.
yes.
There was the UN Secretary General and tribal
He was
conflict
asking about the
resolution.
Yeah.
So would you mind repeating your question?
No, Senor Rodriguez,
What can the Secretary General do to bring about
to bring
tribal
about the
mediation?
tribal.
Yes, exactly.
I can respond to that. I think what can he do is not impose this peace process, which I think will happen eventually because this peace process will fail. And the conflict will continue, and then people at some point will get to locally, will have to come up with compromises at the local level to coexist. We might not end up with 2 Yemens or 3 Yemens. I don't know how many Yemens we will have. I don't think it will be 1 Yemen, but I think that what will happen eventually. But if the UN try not to impose this peace process and have a monopoly over the negotiations, I think it will be helpful.
I tell you, I've proposed to do this right here at the Atlantic Council at the Hariri Center, but unfortunately they have a budgetary issue. But I can bring the main leaders here, and we can bring tribal leaders that they agree to use as mediators, and we can solve the whole problem right here in Washington. So those of you who have access to budgets, please talk to me afterwards, and we'll do it.
Fantastic. Thank you. Any more? So, do we have any more questions from the floor, please? So, actually, if we could make this the last question, because I'd just like the panelists to wrap up in 1 minute each.
Maher Farouk, I'm from the Critical Threats Project. Looking forward for Yemen, eventually, if the civil war does end, and hopefully it will soon. Has there been any work in identifying who a new consensus leader may be?
What?
Who a new consensus leader for Yemen may be?
Oh, the next
Are you
leader?
consensus leader?
Oh,
for Yemen?
consensus leader. I don't think you have such a thing. If you had consensus, we wouldn't have the war.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, there's a dearth of leaders. I wish somebody new would emerge who can really inspire the whole population. But we haven't seen that yet. But we may have some of them here in the audience today.
But then it's not about individuals, it's about local dynamics, and there is no single person who can relate to every region in the country.
If I can ask the panelists to just sum up in 1 minute, that would be fair. Nadwa, would you like to start?
Sum up my
Opinion of the panel.
okay, I just
Was
want,
there something that you
I
didn't
just
get
want,
to say?
There's one thing I want to say, and allow me to disagree with you, Nabil. I don't think Saleh left a void. I think Saleh created a void when he was pushed out of power. And this is why Saleh technically left power, but he remained in control of most of the armed forces. It was the Republican Guard, the most elite and most trained and most equipped forces that are loyal to Saleh, and the Central Security. 2 of them were major recipients of U.S. Funding and support. It was these forces that, with the Houthis, staged the coup, took over the capital city of Sana'a, and then pushed into the south, Taiz, Ma'rib, and Al-Bayda by force. And that's what triggered the war.
Thank you.
Yes, I agree, and I can tell you that I used to be quite friendly with President Saleh, and I remember when he went to Saudi Arabia for treatment, and I had left Yemen, I was here, I sent him messages to not come back to Yemen. And I said, you know, it's enough, stay out of politics, go retire somewhere and enjoy the good life with the family and the kids. And he couldn't do that. It's in his blood. But I agree. I mean, I think he should have, once he left the office, he should have left Yemeni politics.
Yeah, just to end, I mean, as flawed as it may be, I think the kingdom does have a Yemen first policy. a stable and prosperous Yemen is what it wants long term. It can have tactical goals today, but strategically on a long term, a stable, prosperous Yemen that doesn't pose a threat to the kingdom is the main and most reasonable and sensible strategic objective for Saudi Arabia. Now, the way it has gone about trying to achieve that under the Saleh years has been flawed. But going forward, I think it's the only country that where these interests align purely with the kingdoms. I mean,
and again, I agree, but with all due respect, it's not against Saudi Arabia's interest, but it has not been a Saudi priority. Saudi Arabia has been spending 1.2 billion roughly a month on the war in Yemen. If it spent that money to reconstruct Yemen, solve Yemen's water problems, and use its diplomacy instead of its airplanes, we would have peace in Yemen. But the Saudis, with all due respect, should change their priorities.
Thank you.
Really, I think we are coming close to a new chapter in the history of Yemen. This is my own appreciation of the issue. The Houthis are feeling the heat on a daily basis. And I came to understand why Jamal bin Umar was telling me that. In one moment, before leaving office, he told me, look, I realized that there is no way to deal with the Houthis. You cannot talk to them. You cannot negotiate with them. It's an indoctrinated group, small group, but it has this ambitions of Iran invading them, thinking that they will, next step will be Mecca, next step will be liberating the areas under the mullah's flag. This is something real. And when you approach the Houthis and talk to them, you will realize that things never happen. Maybe Nabil was not even thinking about them. That in Sana'a we will have people saying, chanting the same slogans of the Shia that never existed in our reality. We are Zaydis in parts of Yemen, but we are not Shia. So this sort of transformation came out of this ambitious plan of this small group of turning Yemen into Wilayat al-Faqih, a country. Yemen is getting, my pronostics that the peace process will continue. We are heading, that's why I was talking, maybe not in precision, but when I was mentioning 2216, I think now 2216 is gaining momentum. And the Houthis are sending signals that they can negotiate on 2216, because every time they receive more pressure, they go to 2216. And we think that more pressure on them will lead into a peaceful settlement of the Yemeni crisis.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming. We've run out of time. I think they'll probably start asking us to leave. Thank you so much, and we hope we see you again sometime.
Thank you so much.
Sorry,